Hughes here with Point Firearms, and today what we're going to be going over is the anatomy and the parts of a Lee LoadMaster progressive press. Now you see here I've got my Lee LoadMaster all pretty much set up. It's not tuned in, but I've got it all put together so that I can show you guys what all the parts are and how everything connects. Okay, so let's get started. Okay guys, so I'm going to start with the obvious stuff first. That way I can take the big bulky stuff off, we can get into the actual press, and I can show you some of the more important, smaller, more precise pieces of the press. Now, obviously right here, these tubes that go up, and then there's a hopper up here on top. I don't know if you'll be able to see that, but I'll show you in a second. This is actually your case feeder attachment, alright? And this is simple to take on and off. Basically, there's just a little bolt here with a couple little nuts on it, and it allows you to set your depth on your case feeder. Alright, so there's the bolt and the nuts, and then you'll have 4 tubes that are connected together, and then a hopper up on top. So you dump your bulk brass in there, and your cases slide down the tubes, and then 1 tube at a time, you can open the port up for 1 tube at a time, and that'll be your case feed for the Lee LoadMaster. And the way it attaches is there is a small hole in the actual carrier itself, and that's where that'll set. Alright, so let's set that out of the way now and move on to something else. Alright, now up here on the top you actually have, this is your the Lee auto disc powder drop or powder feed. Alright, and I'll do a video specifically on the powder drop because there's a lot of parts that go to it, but you see it just sets right up on top. It screws right into the powder through case expansion die. Alright, so let's go ahead and take that off too and get that out. Now, one other attachment that you can purchase if you choose to is a automatic bullet feeder. Alright, so you've got a case feeder, powder feeder, a bullet feeder, and you pretty much all you have to do is just pull the handle. You don't have to do anything else. And I just didn't see the point in it. I didn't see the reason in spending the money. I got a free hand over here that can pick a bullet up and set it in the case every time. Alright, now over on the right side of the press, there's a few little things that you need to be made aware of. Alright, back here is your primer feeder, and I'll show you a top view of that here in just a second. You have your primer tray with your primer trough, and that feeds in underneath the shell plate holder into the carrier down here. Alright, that's where your primers will feed in. Now remember I mentioned before, also a good note on that is Lee has had a lot of problems with their primer feeders on these presses. I'm not a fan of them. As a matter of fact, the original Lee LoadMaster, you see this spike right here that sticks down? That actually used to be the reset for the primer feeder. Alright, it worked the action on it. When you raised it up and the carrier bumped it, it would reset it. And so Lee actually did away with that design, and they've got a new primer trough, primer feeder setup now. But it worked great for about, I'd say about 500 rounds, and then it started giving me trouble again. So I still don't think that they fixed that problem. 9 times out of 10, you'll never catch me using this. I'll just hand prime my cartridges so that I know they're done correctly. But for all intents and purposes of this video, that is the primer feeder assembly there. Alright, there we go. So this is your feed rod here, this rod that runs right down through here, and this is your feed bracket with the nut. Right, there's the nut, and this attaches here. The only way that this is adjustable is by adjusting the actual screw that goes in here, the actual feed bracket. I'll show you guys how to do that in another video. Like I said, this video is just for the anatomy of the parts, so that you know what all the parts are. Alright, now if we come up here on the feed rod, we actually have this black plastic piece here Alright, and it's got two little screws in it, and it's got a little metal rod that comes out of it. This is actually called the crank slider. Alright, and what it does is it just wraps around the feed rod, and it slides up and down the feed rod, working the case slider as it moves. As it moves up, alright, this little bar right here that's attached to the crank slider and to the case slider, alright, two different pieces. This is the case slider, this is the crank slider, and right here between it is called the feed crank. Alright, it's a little metal rod, and the two pieces are attached so that when you work the action, it'll actually pull the case, it pushes the case slider in to set the shell or set the case, and then as you pull up, it'll follow back, and so on and so forth. Alright, that's pretty much it for this side of the press, so let's move to the other side. Alright, so now we're over on the left side of the press. And the first thing I want to point out are your grease fittings. Alright, you have two down at the, all three of them look like this one. But there's two more down at the bottom here. Those need to be greased pretty regularly. I'd say every 1,000 rounds, make sure that you grease those. If you don't, you'll start noticing that the actual yoke itself will get stiff and get hard to operate. Being over here on the left side will also give us a really good view of the actual carrier. Alright, this piece here that starts right here on top of the yoke and comes up, this is the carrier. The carrier is a crucial part of the machine. Alright, there are threaded screw holes inside or on this carrier, and if you strip those out, you have to replace the whole carrier. So it's kind of a pain. That's a really sensitive piece of the whole assembly. Alright, so this is the carrier. Over here you'll notice there's a little spring-loaded lever here, and then right up here you can see a bolt. Alright, when you work the action on this, this is actually part of the primer feeder assembly. Alright, that's what's actually going to set the primer into the primer pocket on the case. Alright, so when you have a case in that station, you push up, there's a primer sitting there from the primer feeder, and when that bolt depresses that spring-loaded lever, that actually seats the primer in the base of the case. Alright? Alright guys, there's a couple more little things over here on the left side of the press and under the press that I want to talk about right now. First thing we're going to talk about, we've already talked about the grease fittings here. I want to talk about this little lube detent right here. Now a lot of people aren't aware of what this is, but this is actually a lubing port for a more liquid oil. This is going to be your grease fitting for a grease gun that would hook on there, and it just keeps everything pivoting smoothly. This here is actually the lubrication for the yoke itself, and the shaft that the carrier rides on, that's called the yoke. Alright, so this is actually lubrication for the yoke. What I tend to do is take a rag and wipe down the yoke to get any of the carbon or buildup from rubbing and pressure off of it, and then I will use a detent grease gun. Alright, this is just it's got a little a tip on it there, and what you're going to do is just place it right into that fitting. Alright, it's a little spring-loaded ball bearing, and you're just going to press it in and give it a couple of squirts of lube. Alright, work your action a little bit, and then give it some more. Alright, now as far as lubrication goes, what I tend to use is just a synthetic motor oil. I use that pretty universally for several different items when reloading, so I tend to use that in there as well. You'll notice down here on the lower end of the press, there's two more grease fittings right here, one right here and one right there. Those are also going to need to be greased with a grease gun as well. So you should have a total of 3 grease fittings on your press, plus the one ball bearing detent lubrication port. Now down here underneath the press, alright, there's a couple of things I want to point out. One, whenever you use the decapper and the resizing die in this press, whenever it knocks that old primer out, what happens is it falls down into the center of the yoke. The yoke here is actually hollow. Alright, so the yoke right here is actually hollow. And what happens are all the primers build up down there. Right here there's a little trap door. And what you do is just push that trap door back, and it'll depend on how tight you've got your press mounted. But you can see here, there shouldn't be a whole lot in there because I don't decap mine on this press very often because I don't use the primer station, which I've mentioned before. But anyway, what you do is just open that little trap door up. You have to stick a punch or something up in there usually to help work some of them out. You can work the action on a little bit too, and they'll fall out as well. Alright, so that's the first thing I wanted to show you. Let me go ahead and close that back up here. Alright. The second thing I want to show you down here is this nut right here. This is a 7/16. It'll fit a 7/16 wrench. Alright. And what this is this bolt runs right from here, right up through the center of the yoke, and it attaches to the carrier. One of the things that will commonly happen with the Lee LoadMaster is after several thousand rounds of reloading, your carrier will start to loosen up just a little bit. Alright, see how it's got a little bit of play in it? Now the way we fix that is we just go right down here on our carrier bolt, alright? And you want to hold your carrier in the position, and you can tighten it or loosen it up, either one. Alright? And it's the same as, there's no reverse threads or nothing like that. Righty tighty, lefty loosey. Give it a little tighten, and that should tighten everything back up. Okay? Also, if you ever need to replace the carrier, that's how you would do that. If you needed to order a new carrier, you just loosen this bolt up, and the same bolt out of the top that your shell plate nut screws on, that will actually work its way down through the carrier and out of the bottom, and your carrier will separate from the press itself. Another thing we're going to talk about over on this side of the press is the turret lock right here. It's just a little perforated nut basically, or bolt, and it screws in and it locks the turret into place. Alright, so you line your turret up, tighten it down, and that actually locks your turret into place so that your dies and your turret do not move during operation. And that's basically it for the left side of the press. Right, so now we're up on top above the press so that you guys can look straight down into it. Like I mentioned before, these are your dies, and we'll talk about dies in another video, but these are the actual dies that do all the work on the case and the bullet seating and all that good stuff. Alright, the plate that the die is set in is actually the turret, or the turret plate. Alright, to remove that, you're just going to loosen up your turret lock here, and then rotate the turret and remove it. And you'll see in the turret plate here there's little grooves to help you make sure that everything's lined up properly. The grooves there, and it keeps everything from twisting around during operation. Alright, what I like to do is, once I get my turret seated where it's supposed to be, I take a black permanent marker and mark a line across there, and that makes sure that every time I put it in there, I put it in the exact same spot. So I'm going to go ahead and set that out of the way here. Alright, so now we're up on top. We've removed the turret plate and the dies so that you guys can see down in here. This is the actual carrier down here with all of the parts attached to it. Okay. First thing I want to point out to you guys is the shell plate nut that's right here. And so to remove that, you just twist it just like normal, righty tighty, lefty loosey. You're going to rotate that off and remove it. Alright, that's your shell plate nut. Alright, right underneath that, you're going to have a little O-ring. We're just going to lift that little O-ring off of there. And there's your little O-ring. That just holds everything nice and tight. Alright, and then this piece here, this metal piece here, that's your extractor. Okay, and what that does is, or case ejector, or whatever you want to call it, what that does is, as the shell plate spins during action, let me go ahead and see if I can spin it with the nut off. when it spins, as this spins across here with a case, it hits the case ejector and knocks it into your container down below. Alright, so we're going to go ahead and pull that off as well. Now that should leave us with the shell plate. Now the shell plates are different for every case. Alright, so whenever you buy a set of dies for the lead LoadMaster, be sure and get a shell plate. Alright, so we're going to go ahead and pull it off. Alright, and it will expose the inside of the carrier, the inside of the yoke, and some of the other parts there. Alright, so we've removed the shell plate. Now you can kind of get a view of everything that's going on here. And the first thing that I want to point out to you guys up above there is the actual case retainers. Alright, now I hope you can see them, but these are the case retainers right here. There's these little paw looking things here. Alright, and they go all the way around. There's one at each station of the shell plate, so you should have 4 total. Alright, and what that'll do is it will help hold your cases tight in the shell plate and keep them from moving and jamming up on your dies. Alright, so let's talk about the parts that are incorporated with the primer feeder. Alright, just in case you intend to use the primer feeder. First, we got, in order to get the actual primer trough off of the assembly, we have to loosen up the screw that holds the case retaining clip for the primer station on. So I'm just going to loosen that up and move it out of the way there. And then I'll go ahead and remove the actual primer tray. And then the primer trough should come right up out. And that's the primer trough assembly. This is the newer one, made by Lee. Alright. Now what that will expose right down here is actually your primer post, which is the thing that seats the primer into the case, and your primer post retention spring, alright, or return spring. What that does is it just puts pressure on the actual trough to keep everything moving properly. So what I'm going to do is just push up on that lever that we talked about earlier, and that'll raise the primer post up so that I can pull it off. And then I'll show you guys, that's the primer post. It's got a little hole in it for the for the spring. And then on the bottom of the primer trough, there's actually a little indent or detent right there inside the primer trough, so that you can, when it sets in there, that little spring sets right on that detent. Alright, and then it works right up through the bottom, just like that. Alright. And then you can actually see the lever in there now that pushes that primer post up. Alright, one other thing I want to talk about while we're up here is the indexer. The indexer is one of the most important components of the progressive press. It's what keeps it progressing. Alright, this is actually the indexer right here. And you can see that if I pull it out, I can remove it from the press. Alright, and then slide it back in here. Alright, anyway, I'm going to pull it out so I can show you guys better. This is the indexer rod, and this is the indexer flipper. Alright, the indexer flipper actually works by rubbing on the side of the frame of the press and hitting detents on the press, and it actually works the action on it. Alright, basically what it does is when you ride the carrier, by pulling the handle, when you ride the carrier up, the indexer rod pulls out. Once it pulls out, it resets, and then when you come back down, it pushes to the next stage, and then when you push the handle all the way in, it seats it just like it's supposed to be. So when you work the action again, you come up, it flips over, sets next to the next detent, or into the next detent, and then spins to the next cycle, and then locks. And comes up, catches, spins, locks. Just like that, except we're looking upside down right now. Alright, so that's how it works. That's the point of the indexer. Now, to put it all back together again real quick, I'm just going to show you guys how it goes. Alright, so we take our primer post, we seat that inside and make sure that the action works on it. Alright, we take our primer trough, set it right down in there like that. We're going to go ahead and adjust our case retaining clip back around so that it seats in there just like that. Take our indexer, put our indexer back in our carrier, just like that. Take our shell plate holder, till it seats, then the case ejector or the extractor, then the O-ring, and then the shell plate retaining nut. Alright, it goes right on there like that, and now we're good to go. Now if you work the action, you'll be able to watch it spin. Now every time this comes up, you'll see that primer post come up there. Alright, now it seats back down, and then it comes back up. Seats back down, comes back up. So each time it's catching a new primer and bringing it into that slot, and then that primer post seats it in the bottom of the case. Alright, I just want to show you guys what the indexer does as it works to push the case. You'll see here the index flipper right here on the end. It actually sets and bumps on the back of the handle here. Alright, so when you work the action, it comes up and there's a little detent right up here at the top, and it's going to push it out. Alright, when it pushes it out, it spins the indexer, and then when it comes down, it catches on this lip that protrudes out of the frame just a little bit, pulling the indexer out away from the carrier, alright, to allow it to reset inside of the carrier on the shell plate. And then as you come up, you just push it, and it pushes the shell plate to the next station. Alright guys, so that's pretty much it for the anatomy of the Lee LoadMaster Progressive Press. It's pretty cut and dry, pretty straightforward. Alright, now with every Lee LoadMaster, you should get a user manual. In my case I didn't, because I bought my Lee LoadMaster used. And when I bought mine, I had to buy, there were some parts missing, and there were some, pieces that were broke, and I looked around for videos everywhere on all the parts on the Lee LoadMaster, and I couldn't find one. So I was kind of left in the dark. Now I'm hoping that this video will help you in the event that maybe you bought a Lee LoadMaster that was parts and you needed to put it back together. Alright, a lot of the parts, as a matter of fact, all of the parts that you need for the Lee LoadMaster, you can purchase directly from Lee, or you can purchase most of them from Midway USA. Alright, they're not, the individual parts aren't very expensive, so if you're only missing some case retaining clips or something like that, then they're pretty reasonably priced. My suggestion is that when you do purchase parts for it, you buy multiple case retaining clips, because those will get bent and broke. I also suggest that you buy some extra case retaining clip screws, because those tend to strip out really easy. And just some other simple stuff that you might need to purchase would be, if you plan on using the primer system, buy some of the feeder troughs. Alright, there's two different types. There's for small primers, which are for small handgun and small rifle, and then there's a large primer trough for large rifle and large pistol. Alright, so definitely you might want to buy a few of those. Another thing that I would recommend keeping on hand in your backup stuff is an extra indexing rod and 4 or 5 of these of the flippers. Alright, they actually unscrew from the indexing rod. The indexing rod will last a really long time as long as you keep it lubricated. But the flipper is made out of plastic, and plastic rubbing on metal will eventually wear away. So a little tip for you is to keep everywhere where the indexing rod flipper touches on the metal press, keep it lubed with a little bit of white lithium grease. And that'll make your flipper last a lot longer. But if you're going to order parts, I suggest ordering a few of those and keeping them on hand. There's nothing worse than being right in the middle of a reloading project and needing parts and not having them. Alright. So also, one other thing that you can do is you can actually go on also, one other thing that you can do is you can go to Lee's website and you can download a schematic just like this for your Lee LoadMaster progressive press. Alright? And basically what it does is it lists all the parts of the press and it gives you the part number. Alright? So you can use that to reference if you need parts or you're missing parts. Alright, now like I said, this video was just the anatomy of the press video. And I also am going to do videos on how to install and set up your auto disc powder feeder. I'm going to do a video on how to set up your case feeder, and then and all the accessories that go with the case feeder. And I'll also do some videos on reloading and setting up your dies and so on and so forth. So overall, I think if Lee would update the or fix the problem with the primer feeder, it would probably be a 5 out of 5 press. Without that primer feeder, it makes things a lot more hassle because you can't use it as a true progressive press. And so in that case, because of the actual problems with the primer feeder, I give it a 3 stars out of 5. All right, so overall, it's a pretty decent piece of equipment. When everything's functioning properly, I can load a pretty decent amount of rounds pretty quick. All right, when it's not working properly, then it becomes more of a headache than it's worth. But if you're the advantage of purchasing a Lee LoadMaster is opposed to some of the other presses such as Dillon and Hornaday, is it is a fraction of the price. So if you can deal with the headache and you can learn to master the Lee LoadMaster, then it's definitely worth the money. So until next time, guys, get out there, shoot some guns, be safe, and most importantly, have fun. See you guys later.